The executive's laughter echoed through the hallway. "Look at the old man with his mop," he sneered to his colleagues. "Probably been cleaning these floors since the Stone Age." What they didn't know was that Frank Morrison, 78, had once cleaned something far more important than office floors. His name was Frank Morrison. To most people at Pinnacle Corporate Tower, he was just the night janitor who arrived after everyone left and disappeared before the morning rush. That Thursday morning, Frank had stayed late to repair a broken window in the executive conference room, the same room where million-dollar deals were made and where his own Purple Heart citation hung framed on the wall, donated anonymously to the company's military appreciation display. Frank moved slowly through the marble corridors, his weathered hands gripping the mop handle. His back ached from old shrapnel wounds that doctors said would never fully heal. The same wounds he got pulling 3 soldiers from a minefield outside Da Nang in 1968. He wore his simple blue uniform with pride, the same pride he once wore his army greens, though no one here knew about those days. As he worked, the morning executives began arriving. First was Marcus Webb, VP of Operations, whose expensive suit cost more than Frank made in a month. Behind him came Jennifer Hayes and David Chen, junior executives hungry for recognition and quick to laugh at anyone they considered beneath them. "Morning, Fossil," Marcus called out with a smirk. "Try not to break a hip on those tiles." The others chuckled as they walked past Frank without a second glance. Frank said nothing, just continued his work. He'd heard worse. In the jungle, words were the least dangerous thing trying to kill you. But Marcus wasn't finished. He stopped at the elevator, turning back to address his colleagues loud enough for Frank to hear. "You know what kills me? This guy's been mopping the same floors for 15 years. No ambition, no drive, just existing." Jennifer laughed. "Maybe that's his peak. Some people are born to serve, right?" David joined in. "At least he's consistent, consistently invisible." Their laughter echoed off the walls as the elevator doors closed. Frank squeezed the mop tighter, but not from anger, from memory. He remembered another voice, Sergeant Williams, bleeding in a rice paddy. "Morrison, you saved my life. I'll never forget this." 3 Purple Hearts later, Frank had learned that some service is invisible to those who've never needed saving. What the executives didn't know was that Frank Morrison wasn't just any janitor. He was the Frank Morrison whose trust fund had quietly paid for the building's Veterans Memorial. The same Frank Morrison who had donated $50,000 annually to wounded warrior programs for the past decade. And definitely not the Frank Morrison whose medal citations were mounted in the very conference room they used for their meetings. That morning, as Frank finished mopping near the elevator bank, he overheard something that made him stop. Marcus was on his phone, speaking loudly as he often did. "Yeah, the cleaning guy. I'm telling you, we could save 50 grand a year if we outsourced this stuff to a service company. These old-timers are dead weight." Frank's jaw tightened. Not for himself, he'd heard worse from people who mattered less. But he thought about the other janitors, the security guards, the maintenance staff who had become his friends. People with families, with stories, with dignity. He finished his shift in silence and went home to his modest apartment. On his kitchen table sat a wooden box he rarely opened. Inside were his medals, 3 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, and a Bronze Star with Valor. Next to them, a faded photo of his unit in Vietnam, young faces that trusted him to bring them home safely. Most of them he had. That afternoon, Frank made a phone call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Admiral Thompson's office. "This is Frank Morrison. Tell him Bishop 6 is calling." There was a brief pause. Bishop 6 had been Frank's call sign in Vietnam, known throughout the command structure. Admiral Thompson had been Lieutenant Thompson then, a young officer whose life Frank had saved during a night ambush. "Frank?" Admiral Thompson's voice was filled with surprise and warmth. "My God, where have you been?" "Working, sir. Listen, I need a small favor." The next morning, Frank arrived at work earlier than usual. He had something to do in the conference room before the executives arrived for their 9 a.m. board meeting. He unlocked the door with his master key and walked to the military display case that he had secretly funded. There, among the various medals and citations, was a framed document he had donated anonymously years ago. a Silver Star citation for extraordinary heroism in Vietnam, awarded to Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison for single-handedly clearing a minefield under enemy fire to rescue wounded soldiers. Frank adjusted the frame slightly, making sure it was perfectly straight, then continued with his regular cleaning routine. At exactly 9 a.m., the executives filed into the conference room for their monthly meeting. Marcus Webb, Jennifer Hayes, David Chen, and several others took their seats around the polished oak table. Frank was still there, emptying the trash cans. "Excuse me," Marcus said with irritation. "We have a meeting. Could you finish this later?" Frank nodded quietly and moved toward the door. But just as he reached it, the room's double doors burst open with authority that could not be ignored. Admiral James Thompson entered in full dress uniform, every ribbon gleaming, his presence commanding instant attention. Behind him walked two Marine officers, equally sharp, equally serious. The room fell silent. Marcus's complaint died on his lips. "Gentlemen, ladies," Admiral Thompson's voice filled the room like rolling thunder. "I'm looking for the individuals who have been disrespecting Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison." Every head in the room turned toward Frank, who had stopped by the door, his cleaning cart forgotten. Thompson continued, his eyes sweeping the room. Staff Sergeant Morrison served 3 tours in Vietnam. He cleared 17 minefields, saved 43 lives, and was wounded 4 times in service to this country. He was also my commanding NCO and the reason I'm alive today. Marcus felt his face drain of color. We didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Thompson's voice cut like steel. "Because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to look past a uniform and see the man wearing it." The Admiral walked to the display case and pointed to the Silver Star citation. "This man's heroism is literally hanging on your wall, donated anonymously because that's the kind of man he is. While you've been counting profits, he's been counting blessings and giving them back." One of the Marine officers stepped forward with a folder. "Staff Sergeant Morrison has donated over $500,000 to veteran causes in the past 10 years. The memorial in your lobby, he funded it. The scholarship program for military families, his money." Jennifer Hayes looked like she might be sick. "We had no idea." Thompson's expression didn't soften. Ignorance isn't an excuse for disrespect. This man bled for the freedom that allows you to sit in this room and make your fortunes. Frank finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Admiral, it's all right. They didn't know." "No, Frank, it's not all right." Thompson turned back to the executives. "This man has more honor in his cleaning rag than some people have in their entire lives." The room remained silent as Thompson walked over to Frank and, in front of everyone, came to attention and saluted. "Thank you for your service, Staff Sergeant. It's long overdue." Frank, despite his civilian clothes, straightened and returned the salute with military precision. Thompson then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "The President asked me to present this to you, Frank. It's been waiting for the right moment." Inside was a medal Frank had never seen before, a special commendation for civilian service, recognizing his decades of quiet charity and community support. Frank's eyes misted slightly as he accepted it. "I was just trying to keep serving, sir." "And you have, Frank, every day." After Thompson and his officers left, the conference room remained silent for a long time. Marcus Webb, the man who had mocked Frank's ambition, stared at his hands. Jennifer Hayes quietly excused herself, and David Chen seemed to have forgotten why they were meeting in the first place. Frank went back to his cart and continued his rounds, but something had changed in the building. Word spread quickly through the floors. The janitor they had ignored, occasionally mocked, sometimes treated as invisible, was a decorated war hero who had been quietly supporting veterans and their families for years. By lunchtime, Frank's cart was surrounded by employees offering to help, thanking him, asking about his service. He accepted their thanks gracefully but deflected most questions. "I just did my job," he said repeatedly. "Same as I do here." But the changes were more than just polite greetings. Marcus Webb submitted his resignation that afternoon, unable to face the shame of his behavior. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "I have learned that true character isn't measured by the height of your office, but by the depth of your service to others." Jennifer Hayes requested a transfer to the company's Veterans Affairs Division, where she could put her business skills toward helping military families transition to civilian careers. The company's board, upon learning of Frank's identity and contributions, immediately established the Frank Morrison Veterans Support Fund and offered him the position of Director of Community Relations. Frank politely declined the title, but agreed to help guide the program. "I've got floors to clean," he said with a smile, "but I can do both." A month later, the company held its first annual Veterans Appreciation Day. Frank was invited to speak, though he insisted on doing so in his janitor's uniform. "Service," he told the gathered crowd, "isn't about recognition. It's about doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, because it's right. Whether that's in a jungle in Vietnam or in an office building in downtown America, we all have floors that need cleaning." The audience gave him a standing ovation, but Frank was already thinking about the evening shift. There were windows to clean, floors to mop, and dignity to maintain, not just his own, but everyone's. Admiral Thompson, who had stayed for the ceremony, found Frank preparing his cart in the supply closet afterward. "You know you don't have to keep doing this job, Frank. You've got enough saved to retire comfortably." Frank smiled, adjusting his cap. "With respect, sir, nobody has to do anything. We choose to, and I choose to keep serving in whatever way I can." "Even after the way they treated you?" Frank thought about that. "Especially because of it, sir. They didn't know better then. Now they do. My job isn't finished until everyone understands that a person's worth isn't measured by their position, but by their character." 6 months later, Pinnacle Corporate Tower had become a model for corporate veteran support. Frank still worked the night shift, still mopped floors and cleaned windows. But now he also mentored young veterans transitioning to civilian work, and his story had inspired a citywide initiative to honor unsung heroes in everyday jobs. The building's memorial wall now included a new section, in honor of those who serve in silence. At the top, a simple plaque read, "Dedicated to Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison and all who continue serving long after the uniform comes off." Frank never asked for recognition. He never needed applause. All he wanted was to keep his promise to keep serving, to keep cleaning up whatever needed to be cleaned up, whether it was a minefield in Vietnam or misconceptions in a corporate tower. And every night, as he locked up the building and walked to his car, Frank would touch the metal in his pocket and remember something his old sergeant used to say. "Morrison, it's not about the battles you win. It's about the people you help fight another day." At 78, Frank Morrison was still helping people fight another day, one floor at a time, one act of quiet dignity at a time. The janitor they had mocked turned out to be the hero they never knew they needed. Not because he demanded respect, but because he had earned it through a lifetime of service, invisible to some, but invaluable to all. And in a corporate world often focused on climbing ladders, Frank Morrison had shown them something different. Sometimes the most important work happens at ground level, where real people with real stories keep the foundation strong, one quiet act of service at a time. The morning shift workers now greet Frank with genuine warmth and respect. The executive floors have become quieter, more thoughtful. And in the break room, there's a new understanding that every person in that building has a story worth knowing. Frank's grandson, inspired by his grandfather's example, enlisted in the Army the following spring. At his graduation from basic training, Frank sat in the front row wearing his janitor's uniform with his medals pinned proudly to his chest. "Grandpa," his grandson said after the ceremony, "aren't you embarrassed to wear that uniform to my graduation?" Frank smiled and adjusted his cap. "Son, this uniform represents honest work and service to others. I'm proud to wear it anywhere." The local news eventually picked up the story, but Frank declined all interviews. When reporters called, he simply said, "I was just doing my job. Both jobs. That's what we do." Admiral Thompson visits the building occasionally, always stopping to chat with Frank during his rounds. They talk about old times, but mostly about the future, and how to help more veterans find their place in civilian life. The company's Veterans Support Fund has grown to over $2 million, helping hundreds of military families. But Frank still insists on working his night shift, still cleans those floors with the same pride he once wore his uniform with. On quiet evenings, When the building is empty and Frank is alone with his thoughts, he sometimes pauses by the memorial wall and reads the names of his fallen brothers. Then he picks up his mop and continues his rounds, knowing that service never really ends, it just changes form. Because some lessons are learned not through words, but through witness. Some honor is earned not through recognition, but through consistency. And some heroes are found not in the headlines, but in the hallways, keeping the world clean for everyone who comes after. Frank Morrison never asked to be called a hero. He just wanted to keep serving, keep cleaning up whatever needed to be cleaned up, whether it was a battlefield in Vietnam or misconceptions in a corporate tower. And every night, as he turns off the lights and locks the doors, Frank knows he's done his job well. Not just the floors and the windows, but something deeper, helping people see that dignity isn't defined by position, but by purpose. The janitor they mocked became the teacher they never expected, showing them that true nobility isn't about climbing higher, but about lifting others up, one person at a time, one act of quiet service at a time.